one of the two things that are very similar about Hank Paulson and Sheila Bair is they're probably the two wonkiest people in finance and economics who are best with vignettes and human stories. They're fun to read. They're the only two people in finance who are fun to read in the world.
And I happen to believe everybody has their theories about income disparity and what's happened, but if you take a look, to go back to the crisis, at the 10 years before the crisis, the bubble years, the average income in the United States of America, the median income was flat. And so what had happened was the average American had doubled their borrowing much more than they could afford, to try to live at a level which they really couldn't afford. And and the bubble covered up sort of the structural issues. And I think the structural issues are largely, if you look at income disparity, I think the biggest reason, people can debate this, is what's happening with technology. And so much, almost everything that can be routinized is now. And in profession after profession after profession, the middle is getting carved out. It's sort of winner take all at the top.
I agree with Hank that I think we're stuck in the rut of old policies that just don't work anymore. I think, and I would, I think monetary policy is misguided in the sense that it tries to default to the old paradigm that's not sustainable of getting people to borrow to stimulate growth by making credit cheap. But even if you make it cheap to borrow, if they don't have real wage growth to sustain that, eventually you're going to get yourself into trouble again. I think the tax code contributes to income inequality. We tax labor income and investment income at very different tax rates, and people of goodwill can disagree with that. But the impact is that, the manager of a hedge fund probably has a lower tax rate than the manager of a shoe store.
And one of the things I learned, and I saw it from a different side as Treasury Secretary, that I realized why business doesn't get a better system is because if you talk at 100,000 feet, they all agree. But when you get to change it, they're all lobbying for their special preference. So I think you have to educate the public. And the argument that I make when I speak to Republicans is this, that when you look at science and you look at the risks, climate change, I happen to be a conservationist, but it is an economic risk. It is a huge economic risk. And you have to be pretty sure that you're right to not want to take out insurance. There's a lot we all should be doing in terms of to protect economic security, in terms of where plants are located, where building is done, the kinds of supply chains you build. And there's a real role for business to implement that, look at climate risk along with all other kinds of risks when they look at their decision making. To avoid the very worst outcomes, the only way you can avoid the worst outcomes are to get global action. But if I had 2 minutes with the Pope, I would applaud him for the climate change, but I would also ask him what role he thinks population is going to play in all of this, and where when we go from 6 billion to 9 billion people on this planet, what that might do to the environment and climate change.
I do think both parties have a message for African American families in particular who have done, all the data show that they have suffered the most. They suffered the most from the subprime crisis. African American neighborhoods were targeted by subprime mortgage originators. Those neighborhoods are still deeply underwater. Real income loss has been the worst in African American families. So there is a good reason why there should be disaffectation there.
Hi, I'm an economics and business management double major. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on the future environment for international banking and whether you think that the Basel Committee plays a sufficient role in setting regulatory standards.
And the whole theory of the Basel II advanced approaches was the good times were going to last forever. The banks had mastered risk management, and they knew they didn't need much capital anymore. And I'll never forget Bob Steele said, well, either that's true or the big one is coming. And he was right. The big one was coming. So Washington College already has done a good job of trying to hold the line in cost and hold back tuition increases. We will continue that. And the other thing we need to do is put a razor-like focus on philanthropy for scholarship funding. So when students come here, if they can't meet the tuition cost, that they can get scholarship funding as opposed to having to go out to borrow. And so that is a big thrust of mine already. We're redirecting our Washington Fund, our annual giving fund, towards scholarship funding. We're going to be launching a couple of campaigns. One called George's Brigade for students of need, and another broader one called Dam the Debt, DAM, little double entendre, but to try to erect a dam against
I
this.
saw what you
this
did there.
yeah, okay. But this is not, so students of need obviously are a key concern, but tuition costs have gotten so high, and this is true across the country, that middle class, even upper middle class families are struggling. Hank, I am just so pleased that you are my very first honorary degree awardee. So here's your diploma.
Thank you.
Here is your hood. Shall we put it on?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
We're good down? There you go. Very becoming.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Larry.